There were 5 different reasons for prioritizing the industrialization of the USSR. Reason 1 for prioritizing industrialization. Economic aims. Stalin wanted to modernize the USSR so it could catch up with the capitalist economies of the USA and Western Europe. He needed the USSR to do this in a socialist way, which meant having the state control all production and for everyone to share the profits. Socialism must be shown to be superior to capitalism. Agriculture must be collectivized so the state could give cheap food to industrial workers, and so it could export grain to earn foreign currency. Collectivization meant collecting many individual farms together into one large collective farm, which would be more efficient. Collectivized agriculture was also the correct way for socialist agriculture to work. Individual peasant farmers deciding whether to sell their grain or wait for better prices was not socialism. Reason 2 for prioritizing industrialization. Problems with the NEP. The new economic policy, NEP, had succeeded in getting industry working again after the Civil War, and most importantly, to get peasants to grow more food by allowing them to sell some grain. Lenin had brought in the NEP in 1921 as an emergency measure to rebuild the Soviet economy after the destruction of the Civil War. But many in the Communist Party hated the NEP because it was more like capitalism than socialism. The NEP also created NEP men. People who made a lot of money by buying up things that people really needed and selling them at a high cost. They then went around showing off their wealth. NEP men were not socialist. In 1928, there was a grain crisis when the state couldn't collect enough grain to feed the urban population. Stalin said this was because rich peasants, kulaks, were holding on to grain until prices went up, something the NEP allowed them to do. Reason 3 for prioritizing industrialization. Security. Stalin believed the West would attack the USSR again sooner or later. The First World War had shown that a country could only fight a modern war if it had the industries to produce the weapons and other equipment which were needed. It was impossible to equip an army with rifles and uniforms without the factories to make them. And those factories needed iron, steel, textiles and other resources to turn into rifles and uniforms. And without coal and electricity to power them, there would not be any factories anyway. Reason number 4 for prioritizing industrialization. Ideological reasons. Communist theory said that most people had to be industrial workers for communism to work. In 1928, only about 1 in 5 Soviet citizens were industrial workers. So the USSR had to industrialize in order to become communist. Stalin's theory of socialism in one country also depended on the USSR industrializing. Reason 5 for prioritizing industrialization. Personal reputation. Lenin had made big changes to the USSR. Stalin wanted to prove himself as a great leader by bringing about even greater changes. He would be able to point to dams, factories, railways and electricity pylons and take the credit for these achievements.